The Christmas movie, Jingle All the Way, was one of those great scripts that was offered to me, and I thought the world of it. Me just running after this toy and then running in and having someone trying to do the same thing.
Arnold Schwarzenegger in a Christmas movie. Sinbad as a postal worker losing his mind. A reindeer drinking beer. Jingle All the Way is one of the most bizarre holiday films ever made. And somehow, it's become a cult classic nearly 3 decades later.
A lot of times people have me repeat the line, says, can you say that line? But it's again one of those things, you say it and you have no idea. People just loved it.
But behind the chaotic Christmas shopping madness are stories that are even stranger than the movie itself. From tragic deaths and mental health struggles to lawsuits worth millions, from boiling water inside costumes to wrestlers playing Santa Claus, this film has more weird facts attached to it than presents under a Christmas tree. And some of these stories get pretty dark. Let's unwrap 15 things about Jingle All the Way that'll make you see this movie completely differently. Fact 1. The movie faced a $19 million plagiarism lawsuit. Right out of the gate, let's start with something most people don't realize. Jingle All the Way nearly cost 20th Century Fox a huge payout before it even became the holiday staple we know today. A publishing firm claimed the movie's script was too similar to a screenplay by a high school teacher named Brian Allen Webster. His script, titled Could This Be Christmas?, was about 2 mothers from different racial backgrounds competing to find the same Christmas gift for their sons. If that sounds familiar, there's a reason. The basic premise is close to Jingle All the Way's plot of 2 desperate parents chasing after the year's must-have toy. So what happened next? The publishing firm sued Fox, arguing that the movie stole ideas from Webster's work. In the first round of the legal battle, Fox lost. The court initially ordered the studio to pay a whopping $19 million, a big chunk of change, especially considering the movie's total production budget was around $75 million. That kind of payout could have seriously sliced into the film's profitability, and it raised eyebrows across the industry. But the story didn't end there. Fox appealed the decision, and a few years later, in 2004, the ruling was overturned. The appeals court looked closer at the timeline and noted that Jingle All the Way was based on an earlier treatment that predated Webster's script. Once that detail came out, the whole lawsuit fell apart, and Fox was off the hook. Still, the drama lasted long enough to make people wonder how close the similarities really were, and why 2 such similar stories were floating around Hollywood in the mid-1990s. If you thought this was just a quirky legal footnote, wait until you hear what strange detail comes next about the Jingle All the Way production that almost no one knows about. Fact 2. Arnold only got the role because Planet of the Apes kept getting delayed. It's funny to think about how close this movie came to existing without Arnold Schwarzenegger at all. In the early 1990s, Arnold had already cemented himself as a box office giant. Studios wanted him attached to everything. In early 1994, he signed on with 20th Century Fox to star in a big remake of Planet of the Apes. On paper, it sounded like a sure thing. Big star, classic franchise, massive potential. The problem was the script, or more accurately, the scripts. Fox kept cycling through different versions, and none of them were landing the way the studio wanted. One of those rejected scripts was written by Chris Columbus, who at the same time was producing a much smaller, much weirder Christmas comedy called Jingle All the Way. As the Planet of the Apes project stalled, Columbus quietly walked away from it. Arnold followed not long after. That exit turned out to be perfectly timed. By February 1996, Arnold was suddenly free, and Jingle All the Way needed a lead with enough star power to sell a family comedy built around toy store chaos and holiday desperation. Arnold stepped in, and the rest is history. If Planet of the Apes had moved faster, this movie probably never would have happened the way it did. What's wild is how quickly everything came together after that. Arnold officially signed on in February, and the movie hit theaters on November 22nd of the same year. That's less than 10 months from commitment to release. For a studio film with big set pieces, crowds, and special effects, that timeline is aggressive. It explains why some moments feel frantic, and why the movie has that barely contained energy running through it. The Planet of the Apes remake eventually did get made years later, in 2001, with Mark Wahlberg starring and Tim Burton directing. But by then, Arnold had already added one of his strangest performances to his resume. A performance that involved suburban chaos, slapstick violence, and one unforgettable encounter with a reindeer. And that barely scratches the surface of how physically uncomfortable this movie became once cameras started rolling, especially for the villain. Fact 3. Water literally started boiling inside Sinbad's helmet. Making a Christmas movie sounds cozy until you remember how movies are actually made. Jingle All the Way was filmed nowhere near December. Production kicked off in mid-April of 1996, with Minnesota hosting 5 straight weeks of filming. At the time, it was the largest movie production the state had ever seen. Crowds showed up constantly, especially at the Mall of America, turning simple scenes into logistical nightmares. But Minnesota wasn't the real problem. Los Angeles was. The massive parade sequence was filmed at Universal Studios over several weeks as spring slid straight into summer. Temperatures climbed fast, regularly hitting triple digits. That's already rough for anyone standing under hot lights. Now add a full villain costume. Sinbad's character wore a thick foam latex suit with a sealed helmet. Inside that helmet was a water system meant to help keep him cool. Instead, the heat became so intense that the water inside began to boil. Not warm, not uncomfortable. Fully boiling. That meant take after take, with steam, pressure, and extreme heat building around his head. There was no quick fix. The costume couldn't just be removed between every shot, and the parade scenes required long stretches of filming with huge crowds and precise choreography. At that point, it wasn't about acting, it was about endurance. While Sinbad was dealing with that, Arnold was fighting a different battle. The Mall of America scenes attracted massive groups of locals who wanted to watch filming, turning background shots into crowd control exercises. Security struggled to keep things moving, and production often had to work around curious onlookers. Between the heat, the crowds, and the compressed schedule, it's kind of amazing the movie got finished on time at all. And yet, the costume problems didn't stop there. Fact 4. The Turbo Man suit had a special race car cooling system. Turbo Man might look sleek and heroic on screen, but wearing that suit was anything but comfortable. Daniel Riordan handled most of the physical performance as Turbo Man, and production knew right away the costume was going to be brutal. Between the body armor, the helmet, and the flying scenes, overheating was a serious concern. To deal with that, the crew borrowed technology from an unexpected place. Riordan wore a cooling vest underneath the suit, similar to what race car drivers use. The vest contained thin tubing woven throughout the fabric, circulating cold water directly against his torso. On paper, it sounded like a smart solution, and in some ways, it worked. His core temperature stayed manageable. The problem was everything else. The system didn't extend to the helmet. So while his body felt cold, his head absorbed all the desert heat during the flying scenes filmed in the Vasquez Rocks area. The result was a strange imbalance: cold chest, overheated head, long hours suspended in harnesses while trying to hit precise marks. Comfort was never really the goal. Getting the shot was. And considering how much trouble the villain and hero costumes caused, it's almost surprising the casting itself didn't create even more chaos, especially when you find out who was originally supposed to play Myron. Fact 5. Joe Pesci was supposed to play Myron, not Sinbad. This one completely changes how you look at the movie. Early on, Chris Columbus originally had Joe Pesci in mind for the role of Myron, the unhinged postal worker who slowly spirals out of control over a Turbo Man doll. On paper, it kind of makes sense. Pesci had already worked with Columbus on the Home Alone movies and was great at playing volatile, unpredictable characters. The idea of him squaring off against Arnold Schwarzenegger sounds funny, but in a much darker way. Think about Pesci's energy at the time. This is the same guy who terrified audiences in Goodfellas and Casino. Even when he played comedy, there was always a real sense that things could get ugly fast. If he had played Myron, the character might have felt less like a stressed-out dad and more like an actual threat. That edge could have shifted the tone away from family chaos and into something sharper and less playful. Instead, Sinbad got the role, and a lot of that came down to timing. The production was delayed so Sinbad could fulfill a commitment to travel overseas with Hillary Clinton on a goodwill mission. Columbus agreed to wait. But Sinbad reportedly assumed he had blown the audition and even told his manager he was ready to walk away from acting altogether. Obviously, that didn't happen, and the delay worked out in his favor. Looking back, it's hard to imagine anyone else in the role. Sinbad brought a cartoonish frustration that balanced Arnold's straight-faced intensity. The character stays loud, desperate, and ridiculous, but never genuinely scary. That choice keeps the movie in safe holiday comedy territory, even when things escalate. And once you know Pesci was almost involved, it makes you wonder how many scenes would have played completely differently if that casting had gone another way. And once Sinbad was on set, his approach created another unexpected challenge for Arnold that nobody planned for. Fact 6. Sinbad's improvising forced Arnold to improvise too. Sinbad came into Jingle All the Way with a background rooted in stand-up comedy. Improvisation was second nature to him. Once filming started, he didn't always stick tightly to the script, especially during dialogue-heavy scenes with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He would tweak lines, add reactions, or toss in something unexpected just to see what would happen. Arnold, on the other hand, came from a very different acting background. He was used to precise dialogue, clear blocking, and delivering lines exactly as written. When your scene partner suddenly changes things mid-take, that can throw you off. Instead of stopping or pushing back, Arnold adapted. He started improvising, too, reacting in real time to Sinbad's energy. You can actually feel this dynamic on screen. Some exchanges have a slightly messy, unpredictable rhythm to them. Arnold occasionally looks like he's processing what just happened before responding, and that works in the movie's favor. It makes the rivalry feel less scripted and more like two exhausted dads losing control as Christmas pressure builds. This back and forth also explains why the movie feels louder and more chaotic than a typical holiday comedy. Scenes don't feel overly polished. They feel reactive. That tension between structure and spontaneity gives the film a strange charm. You're watching two very different performers adjusting to each other in real time, and that friction becomes part of the comedy. It's one of those behind-the-scenes details that explains why the movie feels slightly unhinged in the best way. And once you start noticing little odd choices in dialogue, you realize the improvisation probably went even further than people realize. That same looseness in writing also allowed for some very random jokes to slip through, including one involving Santa's reindeer that most viewers completely missed. Fact 7. 3 members of the Jackson 5 are Santa's reindeer. This is one of those jokes that flies right past most people, even if they've seen the movie multiple times. It happens quickly and isn't explained at all. During the radio station scene, when Howard and Myron are competing in a contest, the DJ asks a contestant to name Santa's reindeer. The contestant confidently rattles off Randy, Tito, and Jermaine. If you know pop culture, the joke lands quietly. Those aren't reindeer at all. They're members of the Jackson 5. It's such a strange reference, especially in a kids' movie, that most people don't even register it the first time around. But once you notice it, it's hard not to laugh at how random it is. This kind of joke feels like something that slipped in because the script wasn't being micromanaged to death. Someone in the writer's room probably tossed it out. Everyone shrugged, and it stayed. There's no setup, no explanation, and no payoff. It just exists for the handful of viewers who catch it. Moments like this are part of why Jingle All the Way has aged the way it has. It's not a tightly engineered comedy. It's messy, loud, and occasionally bizarre. The movie isn't afraid to throw in a joke that only a fraction of the audience will understand, and that gives it personality. Once you start noticing these little details, you realize the production was full of odd choices and last-minute decisions. And that becomes even clearer when you look at how they handled casting Santa Claus, because more than one very unexpected person ended up in that suit. Fact 8. Both The Big Show and Vern Troyer played Santa. The Santa warehouse fight scene is already chaotic, but the cast of Santas is where things get really wild. Among them are 2 that stand out completely. On the one hand, you have Paul White, who at the time was known in WCW as the Giant, and would later become The Big Show in WWE. He's huge, 7 feet tall, and his presence in a crowd of Santas is instantly noticeable. On the other hand, you have Vern Troyer, tiny in comparison, just under 3 feet tall, in an uncredited role before he became famous as Mini-Me in Austin Powers, the spy who shagged me. So in one scene, you've got a Santa who could probably dunk on anyone, and another who could fit inside a stocking. The visual contrast is absurd and hilarious, adding a layer of comedy that goes beyond just slapstick. It's also interesting because it shows how many people wanted to be a part of this chaotic production, even in tiny or background roles. Both White and Troyer had very different careers ahead of them, but for a few minutes in that warehouse, they were just part of the madcap fight, and it's impossible to ignore them. That scene captures the weird charm of Jingle All the Way. The film doesn't take itself too seriously, but it still invests in these small, strange details that give it lasting appeal. You notice stuff like this more and more when you watch behind-the-scenes photos or interviews, and it makes you appreciate the little touches that the casual audience might completely miss. Fact 9. Chris Parnell's first movie role was as the annoying toy store clerk. Before he was a household name on Saturday Night Live, Chris Parnell was just starting out in Hollywood. His first film role? The toy store clerk, who drives Arnold completely crazy. It's a small part, but it's iconic in a very specific way. He's obnoxious, sarcastic, and completely unhelpful. Basically, the perfect foil to a dad in a desperate holiday toy chase. Parnell was still learning the ropes at the time, figuring out how movie sets worked while trying not to freeze up next to stars like Schwarzenegger and Sinbad. Even though it was a minor role, It required timing and energy, and he handled it well. It's funny to look back knowing that this small, almost forgettable role would eventually lead to him voicing some of the funniest characters in animation and starring in countless sketches over decades. What makes it even more interesting is how that tiny role adds to the film's realism in a weird way. The toy store scene is hectic and stressful, but having a clerk who is deliberately unhelpful makes Arnold's frustration feel real. It's small, but it matters for the tone of the movie. Plus, it's a fun little trivia nugget for anyone who's followed Parnell's career. From sarcastic clerk to animated voice legend. Fact 10. The parade was based on a real Minneapolis event, but shot in Los Angeles. The parade scene in the movie is one of the biggest logistical feats you probably don't even think about when watching. It's based on the real Holidazzle parade in Minneapolis, which has a long tradition and a very specific winter vibe. But instead of filming the entire scene in Minnesota, the production moved it to a Hollywood backlot. Why? Logistics, safety, and the fact that recreating Minneapolis streets in LA was more controllable for the crew. They did shoot some 5 weeks in Minnesota to capture the authentic Mall of America and Winter City shots, but everything else, the big parade scenes, the toy store interiors, the chaotic streets, was completed in California. 3 weeks of filming, over 1,500 extras, and multiple custom floats went into creating the illusion that everything was happening in one continuous location. Helicopters filmed aerial shots, and matte painting was used to stitch together the Minnesota and Los Angeles footage seamlessly. It's one of those behind-the-scenes details that makes you appreciate the effort that goes into even a light-hearted family comedy. The parade might feel spontaneous and wild on screen, but it's actually a carefully coordinated production feat. And thinking about the extras, the floats, the planning, it's incredible that it all comes together so fluidly for a scene that lasts only a few minutes on film. Fact 11. Only 200,000 Turbo Man toys were made. The movie is centered around the Turbo Man craze, but surprisingly, the actual merchandise was limited. Only 200,000 Turbo Man action figures were ever produced, spread across about 2,300 Walmart stores, selling for $25 each. That's not exactly a huge release, considering how central the toy is to the movie's story. The timeline helps explain this. With filming and post-production moving so quickly, there wasn't much time to create an expansive marketing campaign or mass-produce toys. Comparatively, movies like Space Jam or 101 Dalmatians had a massive merchandising push, but Jingle All the Way kept things relatively modest. There's even a note that Sinbad's Dementor doll, which was designed for research and toy testing, never made it to stores. He didn't even get to keep a prototype, and it was intentionally held back to avoid competition with Turbo Man. It's wild to realize that a movie about a toy craze barely had toys for people to buy. But it also adds to the quirky charm of the movie. The whole thing feels like a snapshot of 90s chaos. Big-budget family comedy, over-the-top chase sequences, a limited toy run, and actors sweating through insane costumes in the middle of summer. It's ridiculous, but that's exactly why it's still remembered today. Fact 12. The movie premiered the same weekend as the Tickle Me Elmo craze. The timing on this one is almost uncomfortable in how perfect it was. The movie hit theaters during the exact same holiday season when Tickle Me Elmo turned shopping malls into battlegrounds. Parents weren't just stressed, they were frantic. Store aisles filled with shouting, grabbing, and that weird holiday desperation where logic completely leaves the room. And there was this movie, playing in theaters, showing parents losing their minds over a fictional action figure At the same time, real people were doing the same thing over a red plush toy that laughed. It made the satire land harder than anyone expected. The film wasn't exaggerating. It was basically reporting the news in costume. Turbo Man wasn't some far-fetched invention. He was a stand-in for every must-have toy that gets pushed so hard it turns adults feral. The movie didn't create that behavior. It just held up a mirror while it was happening in real time. What's funny is that the studio probably hoped that real-world chaos would help ticket sales more than it did. The movie opened strongly but didn't dominate the box office. It landed a few spots below the top. Still respectable, just not explosive. But over time, that coincidence became part of its legacy. Watching it now feels eerie, because you know the toy panic wasn't fictional at all. The wild part is how fast pop culture moves. That Elmo craze burned hot and then vanished. The movie stuck around. Every December, people rediscover it and realize the joke never stopped being relevant. New toys, same behavior, same stress, same parents sprinting through stores like it's an endurance sport. And it makes you wonder how many other holiday movies accidentally captured something real just by showing up at the right moment, without realizing they were documenting a recurring cycle that never really ends. Fact 13. Phil Hartman was killed less than 2 years after the film. There's no easy way to talk about this without it shifting the tone, because it should. Phil Hartman brought something special to everything he touched. In this movie, he played the kind of neighbor who smiles too much and crosses every boundary while pretending he's harmless. It's funny, uncomfortable, and perfectly tuned. He understood how to make arrogance entertaining without tipping into parody. What makes it hard to watch now is knowing how little time he had left. Less than 2 years after the movie came out, his life ended in a tragedy that stunned everyone who worked in comedy. It wasn't just the loss of an actor. It was the loss of a voice, a rhythm, a presence that grounded chaos and made it sharp instead of sloppy. Looking back at the film, his scenes hit differently. He's alive, fully committed, doing what he always did. Making something silly work because he took it seriously. There's an unintentional weight there now, like the movie preserved a version of him that never got to age, never got to shift into new roles, never got to surprise people again. The film ends up becoming a time capsule in ways nobody planned. Not just of holiday consumer madness, but of a moment in comedy history that was cut short. Hartman was everywhere in that era, and then, suddenly, he wasn't. And that absence still feels loud. It's strange how a loud, chaotic Christmas comedy ends up carrying one of the quietest, saddest reminders of how unpredictable life can be. Once you know it, you can't unknow it. And every rewatch carries that knowledge with it. Fact 14. The child actor developed schizophrenia and was arrested multiple times. Jake Lloyd was just a kid when he made this movie. Young, energetic, doing his job, hitting his marks, living a life most children never experience. A few years later, he became part of one of the biggest film franchises on the planet. And then, slowly, everything unraveled. His struggles didn't come from fame backlash, the way people like to simplify it. The reality was far more complicated and far more serious. He developed schizophrenia, a condition that began showing signs during his teenage years and worsened over time. Misdiagnoses delayed proper treatment. Hallucinations and delusions took over his daily life. School became impossible. Stability disappeared. As an adult, those untreated symptoms led to multiple arrests and public incidents that people misunderstood as reckless behavior instead of a medical crisis. There were moments when he needed care and couldn't get it quickly enough. Hospital beds weren't available, systems failed him. Loss compounded everything, including the death of his sister, which sent his mental health into a deeper spiral. At one point, he experienced a full psychotic break that resulted in hospitalization and long-term inpatient care. That kind of intervention is heavy, but it was necessary. And slowly, there were signs of progress. Accepting a diagnosis can be a turning point. It doesn't fix everything, but it gives shape to the chaos. Watching him in this movie now is uncomfortable in a different way. You're seeing someone before their life became defined by illness, headlines, and misunderstanding. It raises uncomfortable questions about how little protection child actors actually have once the cameras stop rolling. And it makes you wonder how many similar stories never became public, never got explained, never got the chance to be understood. Fact 15. The movie currently sits at 20% on Rotten Tomatoes, but made over $129 million. Critics were not kind to this movie when it came out. Reviews were rough, dismissive, and sometimes outright annoyed. The tone was called uneven. The comedy was labeled as loud. The concept was seen as thin. On paper, it didn't look like something that should survive beyond its release window. Some critics even dismissed it as juvenile, chaotic, and forgettable, a product of its rushed production schedule. And yet, it made serious money. Not blockbuster domination, but enough to be profitable and justify its existence. More importantly, it refused to disappear. Year after year, it kept showing up. On cable, on streaming, in holiday rotations, in living rooms where people half-watch it while wrapping gifts, arguing about batteries, or desperately trying to keep toddlers from breaking ornaments. It became part of the rhythm of December, whether anyone wanted it to or not. That's where the disconnect lives. Critics evaluated it as a film. Audiences adopted it as a ritual. Those are two very different jobs. The movie doesn't aim for elegance, it aims for chaos. It's exaggerated, messy, sometimes uncomfortable, and often weird. That's not an accident. That's the point. Over time, people stopped asking if it was good and started asking why it felt familiar, why it still worked, why it captured something about holiday stress that never really changes. The rushed production, the improvisation, the odd casting choices, the physical suffering behind the scenes, all of that bleeds into the final product in a way that feels honest, even when it's ridiculous. It's not a polished classic. It's a noisy artifact, one that somehow absorbed lawsuits, tragedy, toy hysteria, cultural shifts, and intense public scrutiny, then turned into something people keep returning to without fully understanding why. And that tension between failure and endurance is where the movie quietly lives, waiting for someone new to notice it again, laughing at the absurdity, and maybe remembering that the holidays are always a little chaotic. If you enjoyed this video, share your thoughts in the comments below. We will read all. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more behind-the-scenes details of your favorite movies. Check out another one of our videos that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.